If you clicked into this video, you're probably here for some controversy, drama sort of thing, because I probably labeled something like this romance is conservative propaganda or something along those lines. This is not a dig at the romance genre in general. Like, a lot of different genres have a conservative propaganda kind of issue or have an element that harkens back to an older time. For example, my favorite artistic movement is the Romantic movement. And one of the core tenets there is that it idealizes and uplifts a bygone era. Oftentimes how I like to see it is like us reincorporating myth or fairy tale, but you could see it as like a Walt Disneyfication of history where everything is like shiny, rose-tinted glasses, cleaner, more pretty, the best there is. When really in that historic period there were all kinds of awful things going on, especially if you were not the predominant culture. And definitely with most Romantic period literature, you could critique that aspect of it, and it would be important to critically evaluate that part of the storytelling. So this is not a romance-specific issue, but it is an issue I've recognized more often in romance genre versus other genres. It probably has to do with what I'm reading. I do want to keep it specific to The Mermaid's Kiss for today because I don't like talking in generalities. I like coming with the receipts and the direct one-to-one connection. A few disclaimers. I am not making any statements about the author's specific beliefs. I did look up a little information about Tamsin Lay before I started this journey, but none of it really applied to the topic I wanted to cover. As a result, I'm not saying anything about her specifically. I'm just saying that this one specific work she wrote comes off as super conservative. You can write something that comes off as conservative or homophobic or heteronormative or any of these other large words and not actually be reflecting your own views so much as making a series of errors in your writing that led to this outcome. And because this is so critical of The Mermaid's Kiss specifically, I do want to put a disclaimer out. If you are the author, a friend of the author, a family member, a person who read this book and really loves it, even if you are personally conservative so you wouldn't see that as a negative thing within the text, this review is probably not for you, as a lot of times I do equate conservative writing or upholding conservative values to sort of lazy world building or a lack of creativity in design. And if I were in your shoes, I probably wouldn't want to watch a video like that about my specific belief set either, so I'm just saying this is probably not the one for you. And if you're one of those people who thinks,
wow, you thought way too much about this
is just my off-the-top immediate reaction to what I was reading, my experience, and where I went with the story immediately. But that's way more than enough waffling back and forth. Let's dive right into The Merman's Kiss. Starting with a lot of this coming down to a matter of biology, the core conceit of The Merman's Kiss is that mermaids appear to be polyamorous and have multiple casual sexual partners, while mermen apparently bond with the first thing they have sex with, and that makes them biologically monogamous with whatever that is. I don't know if this thing happens if they're having a self-happiness moment, so it's actually like a stricture against them there too, but the way the line was drawn here, it seems heavily implied if they have like a peak enjoyment moment, whatever it is they have the peak enjoyment moment with, they're going to imprint on and be like loyal to from then on. And this sets up a world that in a Christian fundamentalist kind of worldview would see the mermen as like programmed to be virtuous, where the mermaids are inherently evil temptresses. If you substituted in biology and nature in for like God as a force, which a lot of Christian fundies seem to think if you're secular, that's exactly how it works, is this one-to-one swap out, then it echoes a conservative fundamentalist talking point where like God is holding the umbrella over the Christian people, but like every other little group of Christians needs their own umbrella holder. So that would be the patriarch of the family. It would be your father if you were a child or an unmarried woman. You get married and your husband holds the umbrella for you, which sort of implies that women are incapable of defending themselves against evil, but it also says that they don't know what the right choices to make are, and like the men have to be a leader and a paragon of virtue and decisive. And in this world where the biology literally dictates mermen make the good choice, they have no other alternative, and mermaids, when left to their own devices, do the like evil bad thing, it very much reinforces these conservative values. And I don't really understand why the book is framing it like polygamy is bad and monogamy is good. Even if we could say say definitively for humanity that's the case. In nature, lots of creatures are polygamous or monogamous, just depending. Considering mer people are like their own society and they don't even seem to know that much about humanity, you would expect them to have a separate culture, especially if their biology is so different than humans, where like there is this bonding component, at least for half the population. So it just strikes me immediately as like relying on those conservative values and a conservative assumption to sort of like shorthand information to me as the reader that the book never takes the time to explain or outline in a meaningful way. Arguably for me as a reader, the fact that the mermen have no choice but to be loyal to the first thing they're intimate with sort of like takes away the interesting concept of choice. I do talk about this a little bit in my review of Compound 26, where like the whole concept of clean romance is appealing to me because the two people in the relationship choose how far they want to go and when. If you're doing that trope about somebody being like a virgin and saving themselves for marriage, or like only having that one intimate partner in their life, what makes that special and meaningful is their choice to do that and their beliefs surrounding it and like the symbolic representation of what they're offering that other person. You know, trust-wise, intimacy-wise, all that kind of stuff. Where if you don't believe that kind of thing, then it doesn't mean anything anymore. Or if you have to, like these mermen are being forced to give it up only once to the one person who will be their forever person, again, it loses all weight and meaning to me. That's just the way nature has intended it. Which rolls me into another aspect I find really unromantic in this situation, which is demystifying the mate bond as a whole. In a lot of these paranormal romances, especially in like a shifter romance, usually there's an element of a mate bond involved, and it's like a magic, almost divine kind of intervention where two characters see each other and something kind of like clicks, like this connection or pull or draw to each other that implies they're meant to be together forever, like this is their one. And this can just simply be a cheap way to justify the insta-love, immediate attraction, immediately rolling into steamy time scenes in a romance, but it also has like some emotionally compelling weight to it, because if these two characters don't really know each other, or if these two characters had negative interactions previously, but now that they're both adults, they click and realize that they are a lot alike and meant to be together forever, it creates a solid, comforting foundation for both the reader and for these characters to know that like there should be trust here, that this is gonna work out in the end. And it creates more leeway for them to let certain things go, or for them to push past certain boundaries where like maybe if you weren't sure this was gonna work out, you would end the relationship at this point in time. And I like that sort of like reassurance background that the mate bond allows. But Merman's Kiss kind of undermines this whole premise because the mating bond isn't like magical or divine anyway. It's really a result simply of male biology. Even if that person lied to them, even if that person has abused them, then that's who it is and they just have to deal with it. Also, the mate bond is one-sided, which creates this issue of like a lopsided relationship in a way that I think is pretty off-putting. And you might be thinking all of this is sort of like confusing for a book that I'm claiming has conservative values to like actually be removing the God part out of it and substituting it in for science. I do think for a lot of fundamentalist Christians, they believe that the secular community just substitute God in for science, and this like crude flip-flop of it sort of shows the limitations of a lot of fundamentalists' understanding of science. Because if such a mate bond was chemically bonding and only to one party like this, and we saw significant unhappiness as a result from that for that gendered role, we'd probably come up with some kind of medication that would block this chemical bonding element. They'd have more time to sort of figure that out, have more conversations, get comfortable, know that they're really settled and this is the one. Also, the way mermen are just stuck in whatever relationship they first landed on sort of reinforces a lot of toxic Christian fundamentalist beliefs about marriage. It's like a till death do you part sort of situation, which means if for some reason your partner is abusive, your partner turns out to not get along with you, you guys can't live together well, any host of issues comes up in the relationship, it's sad day for you, you have to figure out a way to work through it. This is like a way for the science to force this belief that they have about marriage and relationships on people, even when it's obviously not a good thing. And even in this own story, like Xantu, the merman guy, is really unhappy about this element of his life and is doing everything he can to avoid this bonding slash marriage element because he is a one and done scenario and he is afraid of making the wrong choice. And it really turns the mate bond, instead of being like a reassuring factor and a foundational element to build a relationship on, into an antagonistic force in Xantu's life. It means when he takes a mate, even when it turns out to be a human woman, someone he knows for a fact could not have compelled him to be in a mating situation with him. Someone who didn't even know mermaids were a thing until she meets Xantu. Someone who moments before their meeting had been dying. Xantu still ends up blaming this person for the mating having happened at all. He is still using that Christian fundamentalist logic that the woman is the temptress and that she has some kind of sexual power, desire, control over men where he cannot help himself. And mind you, when we read their first sexual encounter, it is from Briana's perspective. Trigger warning here, but she decided she was going to end her life because she's so unhappy with her husband, which we'll talk about a little further on. She has jumped into frigid winter ocean water with weights. So she's suffering from hypothermia and she's also suffering from lack of oxygen by the time Xantu comes upon her. Doesn't know what's going on, she's kind of delirious. While she is expressing like pleasure and desire with Xantu's presence, she doesn't know if he's an angel and she's already dead. She doesn't know if this is a hallucination of some kind. It's very clear she does not know what's going on and therefore cannot consent. Meanwhile, Xantu's over here. He's giving her this kiss because that will let her breathe underwater. She sticks her tongue in his mouth during the kiss. He takes that as an indication that he should go all the way with her. Guy is so tightly wound that French kissing gets him to a home run immediately. Which is also like a super Christian fundamentalist kind of view where like you need to have very chaste, heavily chaperoned dating sessions because otherwise things can get out of hand. Overall, I would say that the merman's kiss reads more like a rejected mate story instead of a straight up fated mate story. The key difference between the two stories is like the characters feel that pull and one of the characters for whatever reasons rejects this girl or guy and they go off on their own journey to like find a true love outside of the fated system. Except here in Merman's Kiss, that is not an option because they can't break this bond, so we're stuck rooting for the mate that's doing the rejecting to somehow pull it together and for them to work it out. And the fact that for some reason Xantu is mad at Briana and expects Briana to do all the placating and the peacemaking and all of the things to make this work out, again is giving very conservative Christian because it's giving strict gender roles where the men are the decision leaders. They're allowed to be angry and aggressive and express all these like more violent emotions, and the women are supposed to keep sweet and do what they can to either ride out this storm or to avoid the storm entirely. Like many times Xantu's outbursts are blamed on Briana's actions when Briana is just like responding to a completely novel situation she's found herself in. And I would say that like this fated mate situation and romance in general does usually have a lot of choice limiting options within it that we tend to accept as a genre staple. Like an arranged relationship is very similar to like this mating bond pull, maybe steering your plans in an entirely different direction than you expected, or like driving your whole romantic relationships from point A all the way to endgame. And we might extend like a significant amount of empathy to Xantu, whose choices are completely controlled by the first person he has sex with. And that feels very limiting. It feels quite scary. It makes sex a huge deal for him, which FYI is also a very Christian fundamentalist thing to do, building up one act of intimacy, blockading it off via marriage and not letting anyone explore anything about it until then. One casual mistake that Xantu makes in this book is going to define the rest of his life. However, his incredible amount of rage, blaming Briana, and overall toxicity sort of drains any goodwill I personally have for him. What kind of culture do these mer people have? Because we do get to see that the mermaids are players and the mermen are monogamous, right? And per a Christian fundamentalist lifestyle, this is the wrong way to live. Like, it should be one mer lady and one merman together forever in harmony. But since the mer ladies and the mermen's biology is not built that way, I don't know why they would have these Christian values. Seems more likely to me that the mermen and the mer ladies would have sort of like a why choose romance style relationship, probably all living together in one big house, biologically adapted this way because living in the ocean is highly dangerous and it takes a lot of adult resources to successfully raise a child to adulthood. And to that end, I don't know why I have to view this as morally wrong. Like, if everyone is consenting in the relationship and the mer lady is giving as much attention as she can to each one of these mermen, she's like specially picked them out, they all have unique special relationships, they spend time together or whatever, it seems like it would be fine. Only that's not how mer society is set up. Apparently, these mer ladies like to collect these men like gems in their hoard, and then after they take their V cards, they just kind of leave them to languish in the kelp garden. And every merman has their own like kelp garden home base that they intentionally keep secret from everybody else, guard it from each other, from other mermaids, everything. And it just seems like a lot of wasted effort and utility, and an additional layer of isolation. So if the merman wasn't like in mourning enough that he's missing his mated partner and never gets to see them again, or sees them very rarely, they have no other socialization now too, like through their own design of this society. And I have to wonder, why is the society running this way? If mermen are lonely, right, then they should seek community. They should build a community. I understand jealousy is a natural emotion that many animals in the animal kingdom feel, and it makes sense for mermen to feel a certain level of jealousy for other romantic partners with their mer lady. But my understanding of how jealousy works is the reason you feel that way over relationships is because you feel your own relationship with that person is being threatened. So as long as the mer lady can provide everyone attention and time, there's less reason for this jealousy. And I think their whole society would have developed in a way that would have been inclusive, that would have had all the mermen kind of living together, getting to know each other, like and respect what each brings to the relationship. Now, it's totally fair for Xantu to live in this world, observe this, and for whatever reasons, just feel like that wouldn't be enough for him. Like, he would want his partner to be as dedicated to him as he would be to her, and he wants a one-to-one relationship. As a result, he's unhappy with the way mer society is. He's been denying mermaids left and right because he doesn't want to become part of like this group relationship. He wants a monogamous relationship for whatever reasons, and that's fine. You can still have that core conflict while creating a happy mermaid society. Also, I think it would be pretty normalized in the society for mer people to be gay. Mermaids hooking up with other mermaids just makes sense to me because they're like adventurous, they like to be out in the ocean, roaming and stuff. And based off of their description versus like the stay-at-home body kind of merman, it feels like they probably don't spend a lot of time together and don't have a lot in common. So like if you're up adventuring the high seas and whatever and you happen to run into another mermaid, you guys probably would have steamy times together. And likewise, if mermen bond with the first thing that they have sex with, and some of them are like Xantu and want this one-to-one relationship, probably have more gay merman relationships so that they could support this kind of like mutual bonding scenario. Don't get me wrong, I know sexuality is an inborn trait, and as such, you can't just decide to be gay, but I also know that sexuality is a spectrum. So it seems to me, in a world where one gender likes to have casual relationships, and one gender is biologically forced to have like a single, very personal relationship, the sliding spectrum of sexuality would be such that it might encourage you into same-sex relationships if you had any same-sex attraction. Minimally, I don't think there'd be the same taboo on it that there is in our current society. And that might mean there are more openly LGBTQA+ people out and about. I know this is only a 150-page novella. It probably feels a little bit like a stretch for me to take what's a very heteronormative story and ask for acknowledgement of homosexuality within it, but it could be a very easy one-off line. Like maybe Xantu wishes that he was same-sex attracted so that he could have the kind of relationship he wanted more easily. sexually, or maybe one of Xantu's brothers same-sex attracted and they have the kind of relationship that he would really like for himself, except he wants it with a woman. There are ways to one-off line include this, acknowledge gay people, and keep going with your heterosexual relationship. And I do think the women being the players, sleeping around and having like the power to leave, and the men being stuck at home was supposed to sort of be a gender flip of how we usually see heterosexual relationships play out in our society today. But here's the thing, that's not really how we see relationships play out anymore. That's like a very trad wife subsect of people who are trapped at home and stuck in relationships. You know, statistically speaking, women are getting married less often because they do not need to and they're not finding a great male life partner. And also, marriages are not lasting forever even when they are happening. And on top of that, less people are getting married and more people are just staying in relationships and living together. So there's just like a whole shift culturally in what that looks like and what it means. We could have a conversation about what a woman's place versus a man's place in that and who has the raw ordeal or whatever. The point is that this merman society is not reflecting the larger culture. It's only reflecting what's happening for trad wives and fundy Christian women potentially. And on top of that, I would say the way the mermaids are acting isn't the way that like men act in our society. The way the mermaids are acting is the way pickup culture and dude bros act, which is a subsect of our culture and one that generally speaking the larger culture frowns upon. Women are warned to be wary of pickup culture and dude bros, but people are also very empathetic if for some reason they're tricked by these people and think they have a relationship with them when really that person is using them for one thing. It's only these hyper-conservative religious people who blame women for falling for this. And also, I just want to say there's a reason that dude bro culture and pickup culture doesn't flourish and become the predominant culture. It's because I don't think you can have a functioning society where one gender is preying on the other. It's certainly not a great way to raise children or to have families, and it's not a great like miniature social biome for everyone involved. Which naturally leads me to make the same critique for mer society. Like, I don't understand how they're raising children to full maturity. I don't understand why society has gone this way or how they could still be existing this long in. It expects me to believe that's the case. That feels very like conservative, closed off Christian. Like they don't even have to explain why that's wrong. We know because we're moral. And all this kind of pushes me to another reason the mermaid culture versus like the bro pickup artist subculture doesn't really work. Because bro pickup artists, the problem isn't that they want to have a lot of casual sex. The problem is that they want to manipulate and trick women into having that sex. It doesn't seem like the mermaids are tricking the mermen, and it seems like everybody knows the deal. I would think there'd be a whole culture developed around this that makes this okay or that makes it at least tolerable for the mermen. So let's talk about all the ways this is a failed gender flip scenario. I really do see how Lay might have written this with the best intentions in mind. She thinks she's gonna like gender flip this dynamic, and poor Xantu is gonna be in a situation a lot of women find themselves in, which makes it relatable because women do feel a certain amount of pressure to remain chaste even if it's not like the first person you have sex with you gotta marry. There is sort of like a stigma against a woman having sex with too many different partners. And also the way the mermen are expected to stay at home and raise children is like sort of emblematic of how often we expect the women to be the primary caretaker of any children in a family scenario. I think on a one-to-one personal relationship, this comparison and gender flip might have worked out okay-ish. But like the societal outlook of it and Xantu's expressed personal response to like this sort of pressure to find the right person before he has sex makes this whole thing fall apart. Because women in our society do not hate men. Women do generally take precautionary measures so that they're not alone and vulnerable at key times or potentially leaving themselves open to being drugged. But crucially, these measures are meant to work against people who would perpetuate violence against them. It is not meant to keep all men away from them. And a man who would hurt a woman in such a way is punished by law when they're caught. We could certainly have a conversation about believing women, not believing women, about the difficulty of putting certain kinds of crimes and charges against a person. But overall, a man cannot go around saying that he enjoys and or wants to drug, rape, traffic, kill women. It's not socially acceptable. And overall, I would say as a result, most women have good relationships with most men. But if you found a woman who did treat all men as if they were trash or monsters or inherently evil or whatever, would you be inclined to root for them to have a romantic relationship with a male love interest? Let's even go a step further and say that aliens came down from space and this hypothetical woman who hates all men happens to make first contact with a male alien. And she immediately assigns her belief that all men are trash onto this male alien without knowing his culture, without him being involved in any of her previous experiences, hates him, and assumes that he'll act the same horrible ways that quote-unquote all men of her society act. Would we be rooting for the two of these kids to get together in a romantic relationship? Or would we think the way that woman treats that alien species man to be unfair and potentially abusive? Xantu fears all Mura women. And to be fair to him, within this narrative, it is hashtag all Mura women. It's not just a couple bad eggs. So right away, it doesn't feel like a very good comparison between women and the precautions they take or the pressure they might feel or even the fear that they might feel going about their day-to-day in society. There's a certain level of certainty there that women do not face when interacting with strange men. And there's sort of like no level of precautions that Xantu can make that could lead him to good outcomes. Like we sort of have to ask, what is Xantu's overall goal here in general? From a romantic interpersonal level, when we're looking at the oppressed woman class, usually they want to marry for love. They want to find someone who sees them, and they want to work on a relationship that minimally has mutual respect and understanding, if not love. But Xantu, even unbonded, is not happy or independent or secure feeling. And it seems like there's no situation where bonding could improve his situation. In a traditional romantic story where the woman is the oppressed class, it's very clear what we need to do to make the relationship more equal, to make her feel more happy, to make her feel more secure. None of that is present for Xantu. And also for Xantu, it's literally all females, not just all Mura women. The human love interest is the female alien that comes down and meets Xantu, and Xantu immediately unloads all of his hang-up about hashtag all Mura women onto her too. And I hate to say it, but this sounds like a very conservative male talking point to me. Because it feels like men in a lot of Christian funny groups are allowed to hate all women because they're quote-unquote temptresses. Like, no matter how conservatively the woman dress, if she walks into her room, her body like inherently compels that man to feel quote-unquote sinful. And there's definitely a stereotype that women quote-unquote throw themselves at men when really all they're doing is just standing around and being normal. And there's this idea that the women want to scoop up the righteous man who would offer them everything, like God's protection, financial stability, all this other stuff, including his love and I guess his version of respect. And all these like ungrateful women want is really his money, and to baby trap him with a kiddo that might not even be his if he's not very careful. Which, like, I know hashtag not all conservative men, but this like toxic little miasma of stuff is a talking point that's repeated very loudly and consistently, and it feels like it's sort of imprinted itself into my romance novel now. And I guess we're supposed to overlook the fact that Xantu is a shitbag because he's quote-unquote a godly man. After all, he wants a family with kids too. He's even had practice with kids raising his brother's child. He just happens to want a mate who also will stay at home with the kids and take over all the raising of them so he can just hang out and play with them and still get all the credit for being a good father. Which rolls us into Briana and how she is a godly wife that just needs a real and godly man. So let's enter Briana, who desperately wants to be a trad wife. And unfortunately, it seems like she's just chosen the wrong man for that. Because her husband is someone who's not giving her emotional support and has literally been incapable of providing her with children. She got very far along once and unfortunately had a stillbirth. And huge trigger warning here, because the way stillbirth and miscarriages are handled within the story is grotesque and deeply upsetting. But I do think the fact that Briana chose the wrong man is actually like a problem with her Christian fundamentalist programming. In this sort of like subculture, women are told to choose strong men who don't show a lot of emotion and who are well off and could protect them and all this other like masculine hyper toxic stuff. So she does marry a man who shows no emotion, and then like 2 years into the relationship, she's surprised he doesn't have any emotion. And I guess the assumption on her part was that within the bonds of their marriage, he would confide in her and have a more rich inner emotional life she just didn't get to experience until they were married. But that's not the case. And I think maybe worse for her than the lack of emotional availability is that it doesn't seem like he cares enough about them having children and having a legacy. In a traditional Christian fundamentalist framework, men aren't supposed to be super involved in child rearing, but they are supposed to care a lot about having children, perpetuating their genes and their legacy. So the fact that he kind of like shoulder shrugs this stillbirth slash miscarriage, the fact that he doesn't seem like super dedicated to them having intimate times specifically to procreate is a problem, like within the narrative, both for Briana and for like these Christian values he's failing to uphold. So what does Briana do now that she knows she's in a failed marriage and she's not going to be able to have children in this relationship? Does she A, divorce him? B, find another way to be happy? C, do something that's completely unhinged? The answer is going to be C. And huge trigger warning here because, again, as I said earlier, Briana's solution to her inability to have children and her unhappiness in her marriage is to die. And she decides to do this by jumping off a pier into frigid water with weights to hold her down and keep her from surfacing, which I get she is depressed from her stillbirth or miscarriage, right? And I support grieving that kind of thing and fully exploring it. But if you are having self-harming tendencies crop up in your thinking, you need to see a therapist. To me, the fact that she doesn't see therapy is like another sign of Christian fundamentalist thinking that's sort of like repressive and suggests that you should not need therapy or you should not need to talk to anyone. You should work it out on your own. But also the idea that she might not be able to have children and therefore she has nothing left to live for feels very like Christian trad wife procreation forward, when there's lots of other reasons people can go on to have happy lives with children, with adopted children, mentoring if they really want that child aspect but can't have kids for some reason. Like, there are so many solutions here, and you can just be happy without kids too. And on top of that, there's this confused repeating concept that like Briana cannot get divorced, which obviously Christian fundamentalists frown on divorce, but it's not even that for her. Apparently, her father made her promise she would not divorce this man because Briana's mother divorced her father and he spent the rest of his life sad and pining as a result. And this was very interesting because it's not the wife's sacred wedding vows to her husband that's keeping her from divorcing him. It is her father. And this again like harkens back to like the umbrella concept where like God is protecting the Christians and then Briana's father was protecting her. He handed her off to Briana's husband to protect her with his umbrella. So she's like incapable of fending for herself, and she cannot go back to her father's protection if she leaves her husband because her father made her make this ridiculous promise. And it's also kind of telling of the father's state of mind that like he was a righteous and godly man and he thought he had married a wife who was the same way, but she left him, which makes her like kind of evil and with a wandering eye or like a lustful, demanding kind of way about her. And I guess he thinks that it carried down into his daughter and that he as the father has to like sort of enforce and train that out of her, even if it's through a promise like this that'll prevent her from like following nature's cause and being like her mother. And it is like truly a crazy and dangerous promise this father made Briana take, as it is literally resulting into her taking her life. But in this book, the husband's only been emotionally abusive. What if he was physically abusive? Would this promise still hold weight? Is Briana expected to stay with this man no matter what he does to her? Like, is that really the father's expectation? I'm just confused by the motivation as a whole and find the whole thing disgusting. And I also think there's this subtext that Briana's husband is the wrong man for her and not truly godly, and that's why the two of them can't have a successful pregnancy. And likewise, when Xantu and her couple, part of the reason we know that that's truly a godly relationship is because it gets Briana pregnant and she's able to successfully have that child. And I think too that's also why it's okay for Briana to cheat on her husband, because number one, she had gone to the ocean to kill herself, and if she had been dead, then Obviously, there had been no cheating, but since she gets a second chance of life, where Xantu literally breathes life back into her and like baptizes her anew or whatever, her old life and her old connections no longer hold any sway on her, and that's why it's okay for her to cheat in this situation. Even though from like my perspective, it was highly confusing because her being in a relationship with another man and then starting a relationship with Xantu is literally doing the very thing Xantu is most afraid the merwomen will do to him. And it might feel like I'm reaching a little bit when I'm talking about her hitting the water a second time being like a baptism, born again kind of moment. And I 100% agree it does feel like reaching, but here is why I feel I'm validated in doing it. First of all, Xantu said he wanted a committed partner, someone who would commit to him and only him. And Briana becoming his mate is an act of unfaithfulness from the start of their relationship. And it's the first time she's transgressed this idea of loyalty at all. It's a thing that she was willing to die rather than get divorced and be unfaithful to this other husband. So the narrative needs to take their issues and find a way to work them around and make this okay if I'm to root for this love story. And the only way I can see them doing that is by arguing that this is actually not a transgression on Briana's relationship because her old relationships are null and void now. But honestly, I don't want to beat on Briana too much because Xantu does that more than often enough in the narrative. She's meek, she keeps sweet, and she's consistently punished anytime she disobeys Xantu. It could be just her being curious and wanting to explore her surroundings. It could be her going back to save his life. But either way, she is the one who pays the price for her disobedience. And all of this sort of feels like it aligns with a conservative mindset where no matter how godly and well the woman behaves, she is the one who's going to be bearing the brunt of whatever's going on in life. So it's probably no surprise to you guys that despite some fairly pretty ocean description, I just wasn't feeling the love in this romance. I don't understand why anyone would want a man like Xantu, and I feel really bad for Briana. That poor woman has suffered a lot. And while some of it is her own doing, some of it is a matter of programming and training and expectation. And I could have written the whole thing off as just like a bad romance story, but I think it repeatedly comes back to like this conservative mind frame, this worldview that's very heteronormative, monogamous, like closed-minded, blinders on, that continually makes the wrong and unpleasant choice in the narrative and makes this become like sort of a hateful, horrible slog. So thank you for coming to my sort of preachy TED Talk about the errors of conservative fundamentalism and how it creeps into romance novels. Tell me in those comments down below, was there ever a time you were reading anything and said to me, oh my god, is this propaganda? And if yes, share all of the gory details. And the secret emoji for today's video is going to be a broken heart because this romance should have been one that failed. Thanks for coming with me on this long breakdown journey. I hope you guys had a good time. And as always, keep reading.